Welcome to Grab Lives, everybody. I'm your host, John Vargas. Thank you for listening to Grab Lives. I truly appreciate you, your help, in supporting us. And man, sometimes it is really tough to come in and record these episodes. I'm just kind of tired today, but working full platoon duty and coming here to do these interviews, it's a heart-based project, and because I truly believe there needs to be a shift in the veteran first responder suicide epidemic and just the lack of continuity with administrations and departments and city entities not standing up for first responders and their mental health, their livelihood. I just want to let people know, like, sometimes it's exhausting, but if you could help me out and please like and subscribe YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and go on Instagram and just be as active as possible. It's really helpful. I try to do the best I can to make interactions just as fruitful as they can be, but it is exhausting. I'm just speaking from complete honesty, and I need your help. So if you can help me out that way, that'd be awesome. First and foremost, everything we say and do in this podcast platform does not reflect the views or the opinions of the City of Los Angeles Fire Department. I have to say that. And today's episode is going to be with Trevor Millar. Trevor is a co-founder of Ambio Life Sciences. And Ambio had come up recently because Ibogaine has just been on the forefront. And this medicine, this powerful medicine, has been transforming people's lives across the globe. And just to get a little reference of what this medicine is, it comes from the Iboga root for Africa. And the first time I've ever heard of it was heroin addicts going to do Iboga and it reversing their symptoms and saving their life, essentially. I did an episode with Corey Pullman, episode 43, and he talks about Iboga. He's an Iboga provider and a retired Navy SEAL of over 10 years. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about this medicine, the sanctity of what it really is, that's a great episode to go back to and reference. Today is going to be with Trevor Millar. Trevor's got a ton of experience with watching people's lives completely transform. I mean, he's sacrificed and made a ton of investments into this company, and he's been doing this for a really long time. So this is a really great episode. The Wi-Fi was kind of messed up throughout the episode recording, so just I apologize for that. But other than that, the message is clear. This medicine requires much more attention, much more funding for research, and it's a potential way to have a return ticket back to your own life. And that's really what Iboga and Ibogaine are rooted in. It's rooted in your own healing and not into the other psychedelics of what have been presented as like this launch into the cosmos within yourself. It's not about that. It's about the root of yourself. What that is, you do your own healing through self-reflection. So there's also a new documentary that had come out where some Navy SEALs went to go to Ambio Life Sciences and they did Ibogaine. It shows their life and their experience with the medicine. It's called In Waves and War. It's on Netflix. Go check it out. Anyways, everyone, I love you. Take care. Enjoy this episode.
It's time for Grab Lives.
All right, everyone. We're recording now after some technical difficulties, but I got Trevor Millar here from Ambio Life Sciences. This is kind of like a part two from Jose and Suzo, who's Trevor's business partner. And yeah, like I was mentioning before, Ibogaine's just been coming up recently where it seems to have there's some traction with this medicine is starting to take place because a lot of people's lives have been turned around, especially the veteran community. So Trevor, thanks for coming on, brother.
Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. So I'm curious about your own journey with Ibogaine. How did you come across Ibogaine, and like, what's that story for you?
Cool. Well, it started, I don't know, there's so many different threads to it. I think for one, I had exposure to psychedelics as a young man at a relatively early age, and I didn't know that there was even the potential of a therapeutic benefit, but something rang true in those experiences where I remember saying to my buddies at one point that this is what adults have forgotten that has made the world so screwed up. So I kind of had that inkling that psychedelics might be a good thing. I started reading a lot of Carlos Castaneda and different authors. There's a great book called The Harvard Psychedelic Club I read early on, but just a lot of interest in psychedelics in general and psychedelics therapeutically. And then it was actually after 9/11. After 9/11, I just felt like the world was pretty messed up. And I was 23 years old, started looking for a way to give back. And I turned my focus to Vancouver's downtown east side, which is known as the poorest postal code in Canada. It's got a really high rate of drug use and just abject poverty everywhere you look. And I just decided I was going to do what I could to try and give back to that neighborhood and see if there might be a way for me to figure out how to help that neighborhood out. And that basically turned into about a 10-year networking and research project. In 2009, Ibogaine came on the radar as a way to potentially help that neighborhood. And it came in conjunction with a conversation with a woman who worked down there, who had set up a nonprofit down there. And she actually said, actually, I have people calling me for Ibogaine all the time. And I said, let me follow that thread. So I started, I gave it to a couple people early on. I quickly realized I didn't know what I was doing, so I stopped doing that. But she basically forwarded all inquiries to me. And in 2012, I was invited to an Ibogaine Providers Conference, which took place in Vancouver. That's where I met Jonathan Dickinson, my current business partner, along with Jose, who you mentioned. And I also met my former business partner, and we set up a business in Vancouver called Liberty Root Therapy Limited. We did that in 2012. That stayed open for 5 years while we were still able to legally operate in Canada. And we treated about 200 people in that time. And through that, I was introduced to Amber and Marcus Capone, who started the nonprofit Veterans Incorporated. And they were looking for an Ibogaine provider who could help out their veterans through their nonprofit. And that's what led us down here to Tijuana.
That's crazy, man. That's a pretty good timeline.
Yeah, it's been a wild journey, man. Like I say, there's so many different threads. Another portion of the thread is, me reading a lot of books and like trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and a lot of praying, like, God, please make use of me. I feel like I've got some purpose within me, but I have no idea what it is. And seeing that, the happiest people, or at least the people that I most wanted to emulate as I'm reading all these books, seem to be helping a heck of a lot more people than I was at the time. So that also led me towards, trying to help out that neighborhood. It also led to eventually some pro bono treatments for people in that neighborhood. And I feel ultimately everything I'm doing still is really just trying to set up the infrastructure so that I might be able to get back to Vancouver and do what I can to continue making an impact on that neighborhood and kind of help the most. I always thought that if you could help a neighborhood like that, or help kind of the people who are the most down and out, then there would be hope for all of us, really.
Yeah, I remember hearing that Vancouver had a pretty bad opiate issue. A lot of people
Mhm.
are addicted to heroin, and I
Yeah,
remember
for sure.
seeing also like that Dosed documentary with
You
that
saw
girl that was
that?
going through. Yeah, I saw both parts of that series. It was the one where the woman was taking psilocybin and some, I think she was taking RSO oil for her cancer, and then the other
Cancer,
one was
yeah.
that girl going through her addiction issues, where like nothing was
Yeah.
helping.
Yeah, I was in that first one. Did you put two and two
Yeah, I remember
together on
seeing you.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was a wild adventure. This movie crew reached out to us and said we're hoping to shoot a documentary. I kind of said no right away, but then found out my buddy Mark Howard said yes, so I kind of plugged myself back in from there, and it turned into an incredible movie with lots of ups and downs that we couldn't have foreseen, but it made for a great movie. And it was following Adrienne through her journey using Ibogaine and magic mushrooms to help her overcome her heroin addiction. And it features that neighborhood, the downtown east side. And then I'm still connected to part two of Dosed as well, in that the gentleman, Dave, who is her therapist, who's the protagonist therapist, that her name's escaping me right now. But I gave Dave his first psilocybin mushroom journey because he got a call, or I got a call from a guy who said, yeah, there's this guy in Vancouver. He's been training therapists for the last 30 years, and he really wants to get into providing psilocybin, but he's never had this stuff. Would you give it to him? So that was a profound experience for both of us, actually, and then led to some really great things.
Yeah, that's super rad, man. I've kind of like seen over the last couple years that a lot of people see psychedelics as like they think it's like a cheat code, which it can be. I think it just provides like a map for someone in their subconscious, the things that are just lying underneath the surface. But I feel people see it more as like a threat, especially therapists see it as a threat. They're like, no way, no how are we going to be using psychedelics? And I think just reframing that thought process around it is kind of like what I want people to kind of see and view, because I think it's a gift and an opportunity for people to see, because you're going to do this talk therapy, right? And you're barely scraping the surface on something when there's so much more underneath the tip of that iceberg, where something like Ibogaine, which is I would say a different scale of psychedelic. The way I was kind of informed about it is that it's an entheogen. Like, it's not even considered a psychedelic. It's actually something that's going to allow you to do your own healing through a different plane of consciousness. And kind of like talking to other people who serve other different medicines on the podcast too, it seems like iboga, the derivative of ibogaine, is taking you inward. There's no launch too much into the cosmos where you get lost. It's just you doing your own introspection, your own healing from a face-to-face type perspective. So that's the kind of difference I've seen talking to a lot of people who've said Ibogaine is what really worked for them, because it was like cutting through all the bullshit and getting straight to the point of, hey, this is where you're locked in. This is where all your imbalances are. It's time to face it. And this is the opportunity to do that with yourself, which I find really, really amazing. And the other thing I was going to ask you is like the thing with brain trauma. Like, I feel like that's a very, very significant injury for people. And I'm speaking from personal perspective. I had my own brain trauma issues, and there's nothing that was helping me. And so it just seemed like a lot of dead ends, and you got all these veterans coming to you with having some type of weird, strange issue. And Ibogaine is like this precursor to just like bring them over the edge or over that hump. You know what I mean?
Yeah. One of the things that you just said that really stood out is this concept of a cheat code. And it's, it is kind of like that, but it's not like you get to escape doing the work by doing that. It's just more like all of a sudden you are having an unbelievably intense 6 hours on mushrooms, 12 hours on Ibogaine to 24 hours even. But it's not like you're avoiding doing the work. It's just the first veteran I ever treated while I was still working in Vancouver, he said that there is no such thing as a biological free ride. Like, you're still paying the piper when you do this medicine, but you're actually paying the piper and your debt gets settled afterwards. But it is by no means easy, It's just an intensified, condensed period of time, which then, people feel great afterwards, but it also opens up a window of opportunity where maybe therapy is easier or makes more sense, or all of a sudden the 12-step program is appealing to you where it wasn't before because you've kind of pulled back those initial layers. But yeah, Ibogaine and brain trauma is kind of a relatively new discovery that it's doing that, and that it's helping with that. And that's largely to do with this veteran population. And one of the components of that is Amber and Marcus Capone. And Marcus is a former Navy SEAL. After taking Ibogaine, everything was really better in his life to a large degree. And prior to taking Ibogaine, he didn't really feel as though he had PTSD. He loved his job. He loved his dozen or so years while he was deployed. He didn't really have a lot of moral injury that he could put his finger on. He felt great about what he did and what he accomplished. But he got home he retired, and something was not right. And it was Amber who I think had this intuition that there was some kind of a traumatic brain injury that was going on. And whether that's from the fact that Marcus was, a football player growing up. In fact, Amber's father was his football coach, took a lot of hits that way. And then he was a breacher in the military, so taking a whole bunch of concussive waves from blasts, or just firing a 50 caliber weapon for hours on end. It really shook up his noggin. And after Ibogaine, everything was kind of better. And he quit drinking and made a whole bunch of other improvements. So Amber was really diligent from that point forward. And number one, they realized they needed to get this to their community at large. And they can take so much credit for the fact that even this has kind of bled into the veteran community as much as it has. It's because of their nonprofit raising loads of money to send people through for this treatment, people who, wouldn't have been open to that at all. And then, word of mouth gets out there. But then she also, once she saw this again and again, she started knocking on a lot of doors to universities and different research centers, and finally found somebody who would listen in Stanford University's Dr. Nolan Williams, and talked him into going out on a limb to study what we were doing down here at Ambio. And 30 US Special Forces veterans, they needed a traumatic brain injury in order to get into the study. They went to Stanford prior to coming down here. Then they came down here just for Ibogaine. They went immediately back to Stanford, more brain scans, more tests, and then they did a month follow-up as well. And there's been 2 papers published on that now. The first paper measured PTSD, depression, anxiety, and disability scores. All went from almost off the charts down to next to nothing after just 1 dose of Ibogaine. But the remarkable thing was the disability score, which is really the measurement for traumatic brain injury and how it's showing up in somebody's life. And immediately following Ibogaine, that disability score didn't change very much at all. It was pretty much the same. It was a month later that those scores all just dropped dramatically to the point where many of those guys don't even qualify as having traumatic brain injury based on that test anymore. So Ibogaine stays in your system and continues to do work even after the fact. They also did the brain scans. There's been no imaging study published yet, but that's going to come out. But I know from speaking to those guys and seeing Nolan's presentations and speaking to him that traumatic brain injury basically shows up as a dark spot in the brain when you do an MRI, where no blood flow is reaching. And all of their brain scans pre-Ibogaine had plenty of those TBIs. Post-Ibogaine, many of them were completely reversed. At least partially reversed for all of them, and then completely reversed in some of them. One of those guys, he felt as though he had a very undramatic Ibogaine journey. He said the way he described it was that it was long and shallow. But at some point during his journey, he said that he, for years, had felt as though he had 3 knives in his brain, like almost like 3 knives into a butcher's block. And during the Ibogaine, he said he felt all of those knives get taken out, and then he felt his whole brain relax. And he's a, you know, he's an old school Navy SEAL. He's one of the older guys we treated, but he gets what he wants. And when after he was done all of his brain scans at Stanford, he said to the tech, he's like, "Show me my brain scans. Show me my brain scans." The tech's like, "I'm not supposed to show you, but I'm going to show you because it's pretty dramatic." And in those exact same places where he felt as though he had a knife in his brain, there were dark spots in his brain that after Ibogaine, those dark spots were completely gone. So
Dude, that's wild. That's crazy.
crazy, right? I had, yeah, I've just got anecdotes to go on forever, but I had my people always ask me, does Ibogaine work for things like dementia or Alzheimer's? And I don't think Ibogaine would work very well for really late stage dementia or Alzheimer's. For one, I think there's an informed consent issue. You can't give Ibogaine to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. So it's not going to be great for late stage. But my hypothesis always was that if you were predisposed to dementia or Alzheimer's and you took Ibogaine early enough, I think it would probably help you and maybe prevent you from having it. And then I had a guy, another veteran, he got in touch shortly after leaving, and he said that he had been diagnosed by Walter Reed Hospital with early onset dementia. And that had happened years ago. And Walter Reed had told him that he was going to need to go in once a year for the rest of his life to do a workup, to do whatever they could to prevent this from happening. After Ibogaine, he went to Walter Reed. He did his 2-day, 10-hour workup. And they said, "You don't need to come back anymore." And said that where you used to fail in these tests, you are now scoring higher than the average, which is just bonkers, man. So yeah, it's good for brain health, it seems.
Yeah, I think I've seen like traumatic brain injury being like a really silent epidemic because it's a silent injury. A lot of people don't even realize they've had brain trauma until, even years later, they have all these body issues or they have these cognitive dysfunctions. And you go to your primary care here in the US and, all these dead ends. You're going to get all these tests like, oh, it's this, oh, it's that, oh, it's this. And it just seems to be like that's one of the things that don't test for is to see if you do have some type of traumatic brain injury. And I'm speaking from myself being an advocate. I had to be my own patient advocate because that's the road I went down through workers' comp, through all these other things that didn't help me. And then when I did find out, like, okay, this is what I have to do in order to recover, it was about stacking my treatments. So not one thing was like specific. And knowing that I had to stack my treatments, it took such a long time. I mean, it took me a year to where I can just function normally with administrative functions. And then being able to now I do still have some neurological dysfunctions with my body, but that's like such at a small scale where I'm at now. The recovery time took a while, but it seems like something with traumatic brain injury, it also affects everyone differently depending on where you hit your head, the amount of concussions you've had, or amount of even those micro tears. It's like you don't know the capacity of what's happening to the brain, its functionality, how it's affecting the system. So everyone's different when it could be something extreme that they know happened, or it could be something that's been small that has been just sneaking under the surface for years. Even hormonal dysfunction, guys will have like low testosterone and they don't ever relate it to them playing football for 5-6 years. And it seems to be like this idea, like we just forget about like the brain and brain trauma. Because back then, when I was playing football, I mean, you get concussed, it was nothing. It was like, okay, now just wait for maybe like an hour, and then you go back on the field and play again, whether it's in practice or on the game. And it was just kind of like that's how it was. No one even realized how much it can affect you. And if you're younger, it's definitely different. When you get older, concussions take a lot longer to recover. So it seems to be really fascinating how something like this, which is a Schedule 1 drug, it's illegal in the United States, seems to be it's reversing all these symptoms for people, and especially for our people who are serving our nation and the people who are serving our communities. So that's a really great thing to look at as far as traumatic brain injury, because I know how terrible it can be. I know what it feels like. I know uh, the depths of how where that can take you mentally, because the suicide ideation and the depression and the anxiety can come all from that. And if you don't feel right, you're not going to be able to function right. Then all that stuff starts creeping in into the crevices of your mind, and then now you're circling the drain. Which I know a lot of people who go do Ibogaine possibly could have these symptoms reversed. Not saying it's like 100% magic bullet, but one of the things I did want to ask you was with the addiction stuff, because I know the VA for a long time, guys would go to the VA and then they just get these prescriptions for Valium and antidepressants. That's how they were treating. And from there, it was like, okay, now these guys were coming in with 20 years of addiction issues on top of the brain trauma, on top of the trauma underneath the surface sitting inside their psyche. So I know we did talk about it with Jose, but I do want to know, like, what you look for with addiction issues and the outcome you're seeing with that.
Yeah, so I think Ibogaine ultimately is a very powerful negative pattern interrupter. So whatever you've got going on in your life, whether it's addiction, whether it's, depression, anxiety, lack of purpose, lack of meaning, Ibogaine seems to be like, taking that etch-a-sketch and shaking it up and giving you a fresh slate kind of thing. So yeah, I know you've had Angela Scudin from the 343 Fund on here, and I spoke to her yesterday in preparation of this and just said, remind me some of the stories you've heard about firefighters and how they've been helped. And every story she mentioned was actually addiction related. It helped people stop drinking and taking other substances where nothing else was able to. So ultimately with Ibogaine, that's kind of how it came on our radar in the modern Western world. Is in 1962, a person who was addicted to heroin by the name of Howard Lotsoff in New York City. His chemist buddy knew that he was interested in substances, and he pulled this stuff out of his freezer one day. Nobody knows where he got it, but he said, here, you should try this. I think you'll find it interesting. And it was Ibogaine. And he took it a few days later or whatever, went on this powerful journey, had no idea what he was getting into. Came out the other end and said, wow, I'm not going to do that again. That was bonkers. But he realized, wait a second, I feel something I haven't felt before. And it was a sense of peace that he hadn't really felt before. And then he realized, wait a second, I haven't wanted heroin the whole time I've been on this, nor do I want it now. So that's when its anti-addictive properties were discovered. And especially for opiates and opioid type substances, it's miraculous what Ibogaine can do. Rather than going through the painful withdrawal, which can last weeks, months, even years with post-acute withdrawal symptoms, Ibogaine can virtually overnight help somebody off of most opioids. There's a process. Different opioids take different lengths of time and different protocols that you need to do with them. But at the end of the day, most opioids we can get people off without that painful withdrawal. So it interrupts that pattern. And then alcohol works incredibly well for alcohol. You do need to make sure that you can come off alcohol safely prior to taking Ibogaine, though. So alcohol withdrawal is one of the withdrawals that could actually kill you. So if you are in kind of an acute alcohol use disorder phase, you need to safely come off of alcohol for at least a week prior to Ibogaine. But if you can do that, then Ibogaine works great to interrupt that pattern. It worked for me. It worked for me even though I didn't ask it to or want it to. But I had a journey close to 10 years ago now, and all this stuff came up around my drinking as I was on Iboga, and I came out the other end and realized, yeah, I needed to stop. The world wasn't really telling me I had a drinking problem, but something inside me definitely thought I did. And then after Ibogaine, it was just super easy to draw that line in the sand and not go back to it. And then stimulants like cocaine, methamphetamines, very effective for that. The one thing, it is effective at helping with people long term, but not helping people directly off of, kind of similar to alcohol, would be prescription meds. So SSRIs, stimulants that they prescribe for ADHD. Ibogaine, it is good. Again, basically what you would need to do is you need to safely taper off all of those medications so that you can then be off of them for at least 5 days prior to an Ibogaine journey. And then taking Ibogaine seems to help people with any residual withdrawals from coming off of those substances as well. You mentioned Valium or benzodiazepines. Ibogaine is not actually effective at that. Like a long, slow taper is really the only thing that helps with coming off of benzos. So but you can stay on benzos if you're addicted to those through the Ibogaine journey, help yourself with all the other issues, and then hopefully coming off of benzos becomes easier from there.
That's crazy. And it seems like everyone's got a different story with addiction, but I know the firefighter community, drinking's part of the culture, so that is important how Angela described that, because it's very true. I was sucked into that lifestyle, and I think it's part of our shift schedule. We're not like at home, and then you're working 24-hour platoon schedules for most fire departments, and then you aren't drinking really at work. So when you do, you're drinking every day off of work. So it's like, and that doesn't mean that you're not an alcoholic, or however language you want to put it, but that's still, your relationship with alcohol is still there. And it's like this self-sabotaging part of your life that you don't really see. It kind of sneaks in until 20 years later, it does become a problem. And that's the thing about addictions, is that it didn't start off as a problem until later you realize, oh, I've numbed myself. And speaking from personal experience, I wanted to numb myself because I was tired, I was burnt out or whatever. But when it would synergize with the work schedules, being at busy assignments and things like that, and then that's when alcohol became a problem, because I was unable to process and rest and get good sleep. And then before I knew it, it just kind of smacked me in the face. I was like, whoa, like I have been drinking, every single day I've been off. And I do have to look at this, even though I wasn't hitting the bottle and like drinking myself to sleep, there still was an issue there. And I think a lot for these SSRIs, we're very quick to prescribe them, especially in California. I don't know why or what it is in California specifically, but it seems like that is a quick prescription, is to get some type of SSRI. And even along with these stimulants for ADHD, like these diagnoses, over-diagnosing. And now people are stuck on these when SSRIs are actually designed only for like a temporary fix to get you maybe up to 6 months. But now people are taking them for up to 10 years. Getting off of it, something like, let's say, Lexapro, you're trying to get off SSRI like that, it'll put you in the hospital. You'll feel like you're going insane. And I know that's a really tough one for people. And I know this because I serve Cambo, and
Nice.
I try to get people off of SSRIs safely. And that's a really tough one for people. And then the tapering down is really tough for a lot of folks because of the serotonin. And I know Ibogaine, from what I understood, it accesses serotonin 1 and serotonin 2, which serotonin 1 is going to be your active coping mechanism, and serotonin 2 is your, got it flipped. Serotonin 1 is your passive coping mechanism. Serotonin 2 is your active coping mechanism. So when it's accessing that state of being able to passively cope with your problems, you're able to look at yourself in the mirror finally and say, hey, I can take some ownership for some of this stuff that's coming up in my life. And it's not as big as I've created it to be. And that's what I find to be really profound is when we have the ability to cope, then we can see that we have true power within us to look at our life and make these adjustments by just changing a viewpoint. And that's really all it is. The moment we get to change a viewpoint on something is the moment we get to liberate ourselves. And I think over a period of time, like just doing talk therapy, yeah, that can get you there. But when you're doing your own healing, able to look at yourself in the mirror and then see yourself, like there's something really profound about that. And I think when I've talked to other people who've been on the podcast talking about Iboga and Ibogaine, it seems to be a common thread. Like we're our worst enemy. And there's this part of yourself that's holding you back where Iboga takes you to that version of who you are. And you get to have a conversation with what that is. Because there's a lack of forgiveness, or there's this guilt or shame or something that's holding you back, fear. And you're facing this version of you that needs to be reparented, essentially, by a version of your mind or however you want to call it.
Yeah, it's just like that. It's amazing. It's, I feel like we all, if we're honest with ourselves, know what we need to do in order to make our lives better, but it's far easier said than done. And after Ibogaine, we seem to be able to just do all that stuff we know we should have been doing. Whether the journey directly addresses that for you or not, afterwards you just seem to be able to run with whatever it is. Well, I should probably get in shape, or I should probably be eating better, or I should probably cut out that sugar, or stop taking that heroin, for an extreme example. So we really think that what we're trying to do, and what Ibogaine is able to do, is give people their sense of agency back. They're able to make better decisions. Like, of course I should stop taking heroin because it's destroying my life. But again, easier said than done, until you take something like Ibogaine and all of a sudden, wow, I do have the ability to choose, and I'm going to exercise that ability to choose. It's, it's pretty profound to see again and again.
Yeah, I think regaining autonomy is a form of medicine, to reclaim your life. And I know from a lot of people will talk about how addiction is actually the solution to your problem, to a lot of people's problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the core of the issue is the trauma and these subjective viewpoints in our mind that we create. And there seems to be like with psychedelic medicine, it takes you to the core of what that is, so you can reframe your perspective around something that happened in your life that's causing yourself to self-soothe with substances. And I know, speaking on these higher platform medicines like Ibogaine, even ayahuasca have been referred to, like they play a bigger role, where they take you to the spirit realm to heal something, because that's where it needs to be healed. And I find that to be really profound when I hear people's perspectives on healing in the spirit realm, because there's a fragmented portion of you that needs some type of retrieval from that space. And there's an opportunity there to make things whole again, which I find to be really, really great. It's an opportunity there where, something on your regular day by day, going through your regular thought process, your mundane, looking at, how you're operating on a behavioral level. This is taking you to like the deep crevices of that moments in your life. And then there's some type of weird thing happening with Ibogaine where it's rewiring the brain around it. These new neural pathways that are now being reformatting a thought process around a block, if you like, a lack of a better term, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that was really great for the Dose documentary, watching that. And you see this woman who, whenever she's like in her 50s, this is like a last case resort. And she's reframing like herself as like a little girl around her relationship with her parents. And like she's healing herself essentially, And I just like want people to realize, like, in the end, we have to do our own healing. Like, no one else is going to do that for you. There's not one person in a lab coat who's going to come up and heal you of all your ailments. It's a journey into the self, which is the ultimate space of how we heal.
Yeah, so many times during Iboga, it's a term that has been used, and another Iboga provider that I've worked with before talks about soul retrieval. And I've heard about guided iboga journeys where, it's like go find yourself as a little kid, give that little kid a hug, tell that kid that you're there for them, tell them they did nothing wrong. And yeah, because I think so often that inner child has been hurt, and we are still that inner child, and that inner child is acting out. And iboga is a root, and it does seem to dig into the root of the problem. Whether that is, maybe there was a traumatic day with your mother, and taking something like iboga or ayahuasca allows you to see that day from a third person perspective, and you realize, oh wow, mom was having a really bad day. No, mom was having a really bad year. And all of a sudden you can just forgive it. And once that forgiveness happens, then the emotional charge disappears. I think iboga in particular is a super powerful forgiveness medicine. And what is forgiveness but really just wiping that slate clean, so that whatever it is doesn't have the same charge that it used to have over your life.
Yeah, and I've even had people talk to me where their religious views hold them back from entering a space of doing medicine like Ibogaine, because they say it goes against their religious beliefs, and they think that this is, you don't need anything like this unless all you need is God.
Mhm.
And like, and that's a difficult conversation to have with someone, because you don't want to trump the way they believe into something. And I just like to hear your perspective on what you think about someone who's kind of afraid, and that's really all it is. It's fear of the unknown. And for me, I really believe it's just our spirit is something we have to reconnect with, and
Mhm.
spirituality is reconnection. And if you're in a state of fear with that's all it is.
Mhm. Yeah, for one, I'm Christian. I consider myself Christian. I also feel as though just to say that you're Christian doesn't mean you're the same as the guy next to you who says that he's Christian. I feel like I have a kind of a very universal view of spirituality. So yeah, it kind of breaks my heart and I've encountered it again and again, when people don't want to approach this medicine because they think it is against their religion. For one, I've had plenty of people through their journeys come in contact with Jesus, and get solace from him through an iboga journey. But I think for one, there's just so many different contexts to consider. Are you okay with taking a factory made SSRI in order to treat your ailment? You probably are. Those few type of people tend to be fine with whatever their doctor is willing to prescribe for them. So that's what that is. That's a factory made uh, product, whereas this is literally a product that comes out of the ground. This is a plant that God created, that has been put on our paths. And I agree, ultimately, all we need is God. Ultimately, I feel as though everything is God. There's nothing but God, that we're playing in this field of the Lord's, as it were. And maybe you're suffering, maybe you are maybe you're ultimately depressed, maybe you're suicidal, and you're praying to God, God, please help me, God, please help me, please help me overcome this. And then something like ibogaine comes on your path, and you're like, nope, I can't take something like that. That reminds me of the guy who dies, and he's in heaven, and he finally meets God, and the guy's like, God, I prayed to you every single day to win the lottery. All I did, God, please let me win the lottery every day. You saw how devout I was in that. You saw me, Lord. I just wanted to win that lottery. Why couldn't I win that lottery? And God says, well, you needed to buy a ticket. Like, I think so often people are I feel as though iboga and this plant medicine and what we set up down here is the answer to so many prayers. So I think, if you're praying for salvation and a life buoy is thrown at you, you need to consider the life buoy, even if the life buoy might be a color that you don't like. You still got to consider what's being put in front of you after all this fervent prayer. But yeah, we've seen, I think for one, most people who take this medicine become more faithful, not less. I have treated loads of people who feel as though they were atheists before they walked in. I remember the first guy who ever said it to me. He said, Trevor, I was an atheist when I walked in the door. Now I know there's a God. I've treated a Muslim gentleman who was the imam at his mosque. He was addicted to opioids. He had never had a drink or a drug in his life, but then his doctor overprescribed oxys to him. He became severely addicted. In his vision, he was running towards God, trying to catch God, and he was carrying a briefcase. And right before he reached God, the briefcase fell, it broke open, and there was nothing in it. And the message to him was, your religion is empty. And he turned into a very spiritual man after that, that was much more compassionate overall. I've had just one woman who actually works for the vets organization, or used to. She went through a powerful Ibogaine journey, and the end of it was just her walking around a pond with Jesus, and just, gave her such a warm, loving feeling, and her life has been forever changed. Then I've had, Ibogaine seems to have a sense of humor, and I've had one guy was kind of being shown all this religious iconography, all these religious symbols, and the message seemed to be iconography. The message seemed to be, all of these paths have validity. And he said, okay, I can see that. And he said, well, can I see Jesus? And the message he got was, nope. Well, why not? Because he's busy. I've had one guy who's a paramedic who, saves people for a living. He was sitting out back after taking the medicine, and he said to the guy that was sitting next to him, yeah, I saw Jesus. And he said, oh yeah, what happened there? I tried to save him. How'd that go? Totally unnecessary. But I guess his vision was, he came upon Jesus, and Jesus was standing in a river. And he went over and tried to lift Jesus out of the river. And Jesus goes off kind of floating away, going, like, I'm the guy that can walk on water, man. Give it a break. Let me help you. So, yeah, I've just seen so many, like Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor. We've worked with him. He's a dear friend now, actually. He's been down numerous times, but after his first Iboga journey, he hasn't missed a Sunday at church. And he's got a profound spiritual practice now. And maybe he was just more of a, he didn't believe definitely as deeply as he did after Ibogaine. And we see that again and again and again. The most profound spiritual experience of my life was taking the medicine 5-MeO-DMT for the first time, and really just seeing the inherent perfection in all things, and being shown that even our ideas of imperfection stem from a bed of perfection that needs to be there before any ideas can even exist. And that really changed my life forever, and helped me go down this path actually. Yeah, I think another very common thing on psychedelics is being shown that we're all one thing. Like, you're literally all one thing. Like, we're made out of the same substance. I think there's maybe the sense of I am. Like, if I kind of close my eyes and feel as though I am, I think that sense of I am is the same I am that's in you, that's in my dog over there, that's in my other dog, that's probably in plants. So I think there is a great unifying force that I have been shown, dramatically on some certain psychedelics, and then I can bring it into my own meditation without without drugs as well. And what does that mean? Well, the fact that we're all one thing really means a lot of things, but one of the things is, if anyone is suffering, then all of us is suffering. So it's really all of our duty to help each other as much as possible so that we can all kind of collectively be at peace together. And it's a realization like that that really pivoted my life towards doing what I could to help people who are suffering. And every good thing in my life has come out of that decision.
Yeah, it's a really great concept when you're talking about unifying and unification, because it really gets us out of this context of service to self, and then realigning our service to others. And I think that's a big realization to have when you come to that place in your life when you're unifying, that your perspective is just one shade different than someone else's, and you can not take things more personal based off that shade that you're providing for yourself. And that's really helpful. And I think when you have that little extra push to give you that perspective, so you're not just getting caught up in your own shit and just digging yourself a hole, I think it's an opportunity to dig yourself out of a hole to get to that state. And over time, like, I think if you trust yourself, you can get to that point. But when you're just rid with trauma, and then you have a brain injury and you're just burnt out and you got addiction problems, that hole's really hard to dig out of. So it seems like a medicine. And when I say medicine, redefining it as something that brings the mind, body, spirit to some type of balance and harmony is essential. And the fact that it is a Schedule One drug is insane. So I think like the push that I've been seeing by having like Brian Hubbard on Joe Rogan and stuff, when he talks about it, he was like, no, this is a substance from God himself. And this is something that needs to be used and needs to be reversing the opioid crisis in America. And just the way he spoke about it just brought me like chills, when he was
Yeah,
like
that
this
guy can
validity,
speak.
man.
He's a good friend now, but that is like, he is evangelical about this substance, which, I when people walk out the door here, I say nobody likes an evangelical, so take it easy when you're telling people about this. But Brian, man, he's got a golden tongue. I've talked to him about it. Like, if you watch that Rogan episode, and if you speak to him ever, there's no ums, there's no ahs, there's no filler words. And I asked him about that. I'm like, did you practice that? Like, you had to be consciously attempting to make that happen. And he said he did actually practice it. And then his wife told me that he did a presentation in grade 3. And I'm Canadian, so I apologize for not knowing who said this, but the end of the presentation was, "Give me liberty or give me death." And he had these grade 3s jump out of their desks screaming, "Yeah!" So we are blessed to have Brian Hubbard that he has found out about Ibogaine and has latched onto this the way that he has, because I think it will be available in the United States before I die, largely because of what he's making happen, hopefully well before I die. But I didn't always think that was necessarily going to be the outcome in the 15 years I've been working with this stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I do want to know, so your algorithm is that you have someone go do an Ibogaine journey, and then after you're pairing it with 5-MeO DMT, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
what is the reason that that's part of your guys' algorithm, do you
Yeah,
think?
for sure. Yeah. So that grew out of there was a clinic down here in Tijuana called Crossroads, and it was an Ibogaine clinic helping people detox. This was probably, I don't know, 10 years ago now. And Martin Polanco ran that, and he had a woman by the name of Annie come and work with him, and she was a 5-MeO practitioner. And she just saw how people were after Ibogaine. And she said to Martine, I think 5-MeO might be really helpful for these people. And he agreed and he gave it a shot. And it does. It really, Ibogaine's hard. It's you feel like you've been hit by a truck afterwards. And 5-MeO really does seem to speed up the recovery process and maybe put a bit of an exclamation mark at the end of the week. But the first time I heard of it, I'm like, mixing medicines, it felt a little sacrilegious or something, irreverent or something. But my first time giving to someone, giving that protocol to someone was I was treating a young man up in Canada, and he was only 24 years old, but he'd been using heroin for 10 years. So since he was
Oh,
14 years old. But I'm hesitant to treat anybody that's under 25. Sometimes they haven't been down the road long enough to really want to change. But this guy had been down a long road, was really ready to change. Gave him Ibogaine, and he was just dragging his ass afterwards. He was really taking a long time to recover. And I said, "Hey man, I heard 5-MeO might help. I happen to have some 5-MeO. Do you want to try some 5-MeO?" He said, "Absolutely." So I gave it to him, and I was sitting right next to him. There was a not too high sofa bed that he was laying on next to me. He kind of vaped a bit of this. He lied down, and then he quickly sat up and he put his hands on my shoulders and looks in my eyes and goes, "Wow!" And it was to this day, the most authentic wow I have ever heard in my life. And it totally brought him out of it. He was amazing after. He was super grateful. His recovery just happened instantly after that. So then, when I started working with Ambio Marcus and the Vets nonprofit, um, we, that happened because I was introduced to Ambio Marcus by Rick Doblin. Said there's this wonderful couple that's working with all these veterans. You guys should know each other. And after that introduction, Amber was really diligent in calling me every couple of months, kind of thing, to see if there might be a way for us to work together. Took me a couple of years to see how serious she was, but then I started looking for a place where we might operate legally. Ended up here in Tijuana because I have the two business partners we've talked about, Jonathan and Jose. Jonathan and I had been friends for a number of years after that first Ibogaine conference he hosted. We were speaking about something else, and I happened to mention this veterans group, and he called me back a week later with Jose in the car. Jose's a paramedic. He had a clinic running here in Tijuana. Jonathan was living in Tijuana, and they said, "Why don't you move to TJ? We've got all the medical equipment required, got all the medical staff that understands the medicine. We can find a house and dedicate it to veterans." So we did that. And all that to say that the protocol that these veterans were already receiving was Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT. So I initially brought in another 5-MeO DMT provider to provide it, and then kind of learn the ropes and could do that myself, and then now have a bunch of staff that can do it as well. But yeah, it is a really good tool in the toolkit. And not everybody opts in to the 5-MeO. Some people do feel amazing after Ibogaine. Maybe the Ibogaine told them not to do the 5-MeO. That comes up all the time, and I encourage people to go with that. And then there's other people where I'm just like, thank God I could give this person 5-MeO. Like, one guy stands out in my mind where Ibogaine was rough. And I felt as though he was a veteran, I felt as though if I had have sent him home, he was like homicidal and suicidal. Like, he was not in a good place. But after 5-MeO, big experience. I feel there's, perhaps an exorcism component to 5-MeO DMT quite often. Like, there is something leaving that person that once it is gone, that person is back to baseline, and baseline's the best place to be. But there was something, in this guy. He'll tell you that a demon left him on 5-MeO DMT, and if he wasn't able to do that, he didn't know where he'd be. And we see that kind of thing again and again.
It's pretty interesting to hear that perspective. Like so iboga has been referred to in definition eating God by the Bwiti tribes in Africa, and then you got 5-MeO DMT, which is referred to as the God molecule. You're like merging these two things together seems kind of interesting. And the first time I started hearing more about 5-MeO uh, was Mike Tyson. He's
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
where he's been a component where like he said that when he took 5-MeO, I mean, it changed his life completely to where he's a completely different person. I think we shed these layers of ourselves that are not true, then we come back to a foundational baseline of ourselves. We're not necessarily changing anything. You're just coming back to who you really are. It's like remembering who you really are.
Yeah, 100%. A metaphor I love is that it's almost as if when we're living, we're seeing life through a pane of glass or through some kind of a filter. And as we suffer trauma, as we suffer heartaches, as things just don't go our way, that glass gets dirty from the inside out. And we live on and we don't even recognize that it's dirty anymore. We don't even recognize that it's hindering us. But doing something like this protocol, or lots of different psychedelic therapies, it's almost like cleaning that glass from the inside out. And I don't feel like these things are bringing you some missing piece of the puzzle. Like you'll do Ibogaine and you'll finally find that thing you've been missing. I don't think it's like that at all. It's more like we're just cleaning that pane of glass from the inside out. And once we can see through the windshield clearly, we're like, oh, actually, life is beautiful. I feel incredible. I can make proper decisions that are not so clouded. And yeah, I really think that's what's happening. It's not that these substances are bringing you some missing piece of your puzzle that you've been seeking. It's more like you've always had everything you've needed inside of you. You are a divine creation, and we just need to clean away the gunk so that we can see that again and feel that again.
Yeah, and I think also there's an opportunity to educate yourself on your life too. Like hearing from some of the iboga practitioners that I do know, like how the Bwiti people in Africa, the way they have come to harmonize their lives is realizing like we are essentially walking gods on this planet. That's how we're supposed to be designed. And how can you live that state if you're just rid with sickness and disease? And it seems to be really profound too. How they don't have any of the medical conditions. Like when you go over there and you start talking about Alzheimer's, they're like that's non-existent over in those countries. When we're just rid of all these other diagnoses, like, and it's so strange. But that's actually not strange. I'll take that back. I think there's something behind the curtain that's making decisions in order for us to not be walking gods on this planet, to where we can't make those autonomous decisions, to where we can't make a life that's fruitful and harmonious with how we're supposed to be living on this planet. And it seems to be like there's this really estranged paradigm that's shifting right now to where we're moving into that space of people recognizing and awakening to themselves, that be like, hey, I do feel autonomous with myself. I am not restricted by what other people say and what other people do. And that takes growth. That's what real growth comes from when you actually start realizing that, and you're not becoming a victim anymore. And it seems to be like that victim virus has just been spreading like crazy. And it's just like this distraction that's meant to divide us, when like our power comes from community. And I can see, like, as I've been watching this Ibogaine kind of paradigm start shifting, there's a community being built around this medicine. And it seems to be like the support is so profound. Like like if you probably didn't even know someone else who has done Ibogaine who's here to support it, that thread is so strong between each person, because they know from their experience that's one of the key components with shifting this old paradigm. is that community aspect of this healing.
Yeah. Yeah. The word of mouth from person to person on this is profound. The, I think a lot of the way, vets could probably take a lot of credit for this is it's not about, and then we've kind of carbon copied it. So is 343 fund, but it's not just about taking the medicine and then going off on your own again. It's about taking the medicine, showing up for your coaching, showing up on integration calls with other people, staying in touch. And yeah, it's like really thick threads are being woven together by very strong people. And people with gravitas, as it were. Like imagine all the money the US government has dumped into training a Navy SEAL to be a really good decision maker. And then it's somebody like a Navy SEAL telling you should go and do this, you should check this out. It yeah, it means something when even first responders, fire department, police, it's pretty crazy treating police officers down here when it's their job to enforce laws against different substance use, but then sadly they need to escape America to take something like this that heals them at such a deep and profound level.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of friends that are police officers and even the other firefighters. They feel a sense of fear, man,
Mhm.
because they don't want to lose their job. They still got to provide for their family, but they're sick, So like people have asked me about advice. I'm like, hey man, like I'm just here to provide the information for you to make a decision on your own based on whoever comes on the platform. But there's so much fear around it, and even around like big departments. Like I work for the second biggest department in the United States,
Wow.
and LA City is so political to where if something like this was introduced, on a scale like someone publicly went out and talked about it, I think there would be you would get a lot of pushback
Mhm.
because you say the word psychedelic or you say like, oh, this is a Schedule One. Hey, these are all these great benefits, but it's a Schedule One. So all these people got to go to Mexico to go do this. But there's just a lot of fear wrapped around change and a lot of
Yeah.
fear wrapped around looking to find an outside source to kind of remove this epidemic crisis that has been kind of sitting under the surface for a long time. And even with the old paradigms of how a lot of firefighters were going through, I guess, their careers, I would say most were veterans who got the
Right.
job, you know, and then, they just stuffed all their trauma in a bag and just continued with their career. And they can't even enjoy their retirement because by the time they get to that point, they finally make it to the finish line with just barely anything left. Their bodies are broken down. They got knee replacements, hip replacements, and they will end up dying of cancer 5 days or 5 years or so after
Yeah.
their
They can't
retirement.
sleep.
What kind of life is that?
Yeah. It's not good. Yeah. I'm I'm very excited that the conversation is changing. Like we talked about Brian Hubbard, Rick Perry, the former Texas governor, is behind this all the way now. I think the lowest hanging fruit on making this available in the States is just changing the scheduling of it. Like
Mm.
Schedule 1 has a high rate of abuse and no medical use. And if there is any drug on earth that is misscheduled into Schedule 1, it's Ibogaine, which is anti addictive, has zero chance of abuse, and the list of benefits medically are just growing and growing and growing. Whether it's the addiction that it helps with that we've known about for years, or whether it's the traumatic brain injury, whether it's the multiple sclerosis we're seeing it treat. We did a case study on multiple sclerosis where the MS lesion reduced in size by 71%
Whoa.
after Ibogaine. And that guy went from having a hard time walking to running ultra marathons again. He shows no signs of MS symptoms anymore. I just spoke to him again last week. So we have this neuroregenerative program for things like Parkinson's, for things like MS. So obviously it has medical benefits. So, whether or not you want to make it immediately available in the States, that's a process any way you look at it. But something that could happen quickly is just change the scheduling, make it Schedule 3, make it Schedule 4, make it that then makes it far easier to research. And that's what everyone will tell you we need is just more research, more evidence. We agree with you. We want more research. We want more evidence, but just make it easier to happen. And then in the meantime, I'm super grateful that we are here and we're in Tijuana. We're in all of our houses are located in beautiful areas. They're beautiful houses. Most of our guests are American. We've become the safe haven for first responders, for veterans to be able to come and receive this medicine. You don't have to worry about getting into Mexico. You just fly into San Diego. We pick you up at the airport or near the airport there and take care of your every need from that point forward. So I think there's always going to be a need for us down here. And I also look forward to us being up in the United States and Canada again. But, we've looked at pricing. What we're doing down here would cost at least 3 times as much, if not more, in the United States, which is still a bargain. Like, don't get me wrong. If it helps you quit heroin for the rest of your life or get off fentanyl, it's going to save your life and is far more effective and cost effective than all the other treatments that are available now.
Yeah, I mean, watching people with addiction problems, I mean, I go on so many overdoses all the time. And I'm just like always thinking in the back of my mind, like, man, this person could have a chance, and to get an opportunity to go do a medicine like this. And I do hope that that paradigm changes and then things start shifting around, and so someone can get that chance and the opportunity to reverse their life, because I feel like it never really was their fault. It just kind of came up over them. And then this is speaking from personal experience because my mom was addicted for a long time. She was an addict, and she ended up being addicted to meth, and that was like a really hard time in my life. And so I think, if she had the opportunity for this, I mean, back then I didn't know anything about Ibogaine, but she ended up going to jail, drying up. Now she's been sober, but most people have to hit that rock bottom. And even people who do hit rock bottom, they still will not recover. And I've
Mhm.
seen it day in and day out when I go on these calls at work, and it's just like it's the same cycle, man. It's the same cycle over and over and over, and there's no solution at all. And so I think when we look at what these solutions can be, we look at, okay, psychedelic medicine does have profound effects, specifically Ibogaine. So I think it's crazy, man. But I do think the veteran community has done such a great job at finding what works. And I think when you get a group of Navy SEALs together, they're going to be like, hey, we're going to find something. And that's what they did. I feel like they've really paved the way and trailblazed something really great for that community and also for firefighters and police officers. Because when you hear Navy SEAL, you're just like, oh man, that's the top dog in your mind.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And you'll trust that what they're saying has validity to it. So what was the documentary that's coming out again? What's the name of it?
Yeah, it's called In Waves and War, and it comes out on November 3rd on Netflix. And the trailer just dropped today, so the trailer is pretty awesome. I've watched it a few times now, but it's on YouTube. So if you just type "In Waves and War" trailer, you'll find it. But that movie is a documentary that follows 3 Navy SEALs through various stages of their journeys with Ibogaine, and the heart of it is following one of those SEALs, Matty Roberts. It's his first time taking the medicine. He's supported by another SEAL, DJ Shipley, who also takes the medicine with him, but it's his second or third time taking it in the movie. And then Marcus Capone comes down as well. But you get to hear about all of their journeys, and they are profound. Like, DJ saved Maddie's life in combat, and the animation in this movie is incredible. They use the animation to animate the Iboga journeys themselves. and do a really good job actually. Like I think it's I've seen a lot of attempts at animating psychedelic journeys, and they don't really hit the mark, but I feel as though this one really does. So excited to have this movie on Netflix. It's going to be a really big deal.
And I do know that one of the red flags with Ibogaine is there's a possibility for cardiac toxicity. So I'd love to hear, what you guys have done to kind of transcend that in order to make it safe.
For sure. So it's really easy to screen out. So we know exactly what we're looking for, and basically, to give you the long version, is ibogaine prolongs the QT interval of the heart. The QT interval is basically the space in between the two chambers firing. And there are lots of medications that prolong the QT interval of the heart. There's different conditions that can cause that. And really, what we're looking for, and we ask for an EKG from people prior to arrival. And what we're looking for is an already prolonged QT, because you don't want to have an already prolonged QT when you go into Ibogaine, which is also going to prolong the QT, because that's when it can get dangerous. But we ask for EKGs prior to arrival. We do an EKG upon arrival, and we have the heart monitored the whole time we have people on this medicine. And there's really, if we're giving you medicine, there's no fear of any adverse events happening, because it's really easy to screen out people who shouldn't be receiving the medicine. There's the heart issue. There's different medications people need to make sure that they're off of as well. We ask for blood work prior to arrival. We do blood work upon arrival. We're looking for anything acute there. So it's very easy to keep Ibogaine safe if you know what you're looking for. We're completely medicalized. We have at least a nurse or a paramedic on duty 24 hours a day while people are here. We have at least a physician, and then a half a dozen nurses or paramedics on duty with them whenever we're giving Ibogaine. I think we have 7 or 8 physicians on staff. Our medical staff is a massive and beautiful team. And yeah, you definitely don't want to do Ibogaine alone at home, that's for sure. But it can be done safely. I think, there's the cardiotoxicity potential, but I think more than the cardiotoxicity potential is drug interactions. That's really where some danger can come in. But again, that's really easy to screen out. We have, I think our urinalysis cup measures for 28 different drugs or something like that. So you definitely want to do this medicine at a place that is fully medicalized, and not only medicalized, but you have medical staff there that understands Ibogaine, because it's a unique substance.
Yeah, because I have noticed that was one of the major things people were concerned about and wanted like some more clarity around it. And even also hearing how some people have had done iboga like outside of like a medical facility, and they've had some like cardiac issues post treatment that had lasted for a while. And I think it might have just been some type of like either the medicine does some weird stuff to the system, and it's doing things on like a physical level, which I know that can happen as well. And I've heard a lot of people have some very strange experiences with that medicine with their body.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also having to trust what that is, because the medicine can teach in so many different ways in that aspect. But knowing that people have had some very strange cardiac issues after, it's good to clarify, like how safe you guys keep that medicine and how you're treating each patient.
Yeah, I haven't heard of too many strange things afterwards. I can't really think of any strange things afterwards. What I have heard is I don't need to take my blood pressure medication anymore. I've heard a bunch of very positive kind of long-term things. Ibogaine seems to be helpful with blood pressure. I've heard that a whole bunch. I've heard gut issues being resolved. I've yes, so many random one-offs, like and not even one-off with seizures. I've heard seizures disappearing. People who are prone to seizures don't have them anymore. Can't guarantee any of this stuff, but I hear it all the time. I had one woman who was not there for her heavy metal poisoning, but she knew she had heavy metal poisoning. And in her journey, she purged all of that. And she knew she was purging her heavy metals. And when she got her levels tested when she got home, she doesn't have any high levels of heavy metals anymore. So it's
No,
just,
that's crazy.
yeah, one traumatic brain injury was a gentleman who got blown up by an IED when he was serving and retired, got into a road rage incident. The other guy was raging. He took a bullet to the head and survived. But after that, he spent 4 years. He couldn't really go outside. He needed to wear sunglasses when he did. He was super light sensitive. He had balance issues. He needed a cane to walk, and he hadn't made love to his wife in 4 years. Came
Oh,
down for Ibogaine, left us his cane. He no longer needed his cane. His balance issues were completely resolved. No longer had light sensitivity issues, and went home and made love to his wife.
that
So
was Sean Ryan's friend, right?
that's Sean Ryan's buddy. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I remember hearing that story. Yeah,
Yeah.
the profound, strange healings that are done with this medicine are really interesting. You know, I had I read this book called Cambo Iboga Ayahuasca. I don't know if you've ever heard that book.
Is it Giovanni? Did Giovanni write that book?
Yeah, Giovanni
Yeah.
Latazio.
I know Giovanni. Yeah.
Yeah, so he talks in that book how he, you know, he did ayahuasca for like 10 years, you know, and had great experiences and was just on this healing journey because he had some gut issues. So when he was dealing with those gut issues, he was like, man, like I'm still having pain. And he ended up working with Cambo, and Cambo was introduced to him, and then he became a Cambo practitioner. And Cambo took him to like that 85 percentile where he felt he was being healed by that medicine. And then he still felt like that 15% was still there. And then Iboga started coming to him in his dreams,
Wow.
and he was being called to the medicine. Then he finally did Iboga. And he said after when he talks about Iboga, he has like a really like love-hate relationship with that medicine because the medicine kind of would slap him around a lot. But after he was doing Iboga, they came to a point where the medicine had told him there was a parasite left from his ancestors in his body. And the medicine removed this parasite from his gut, and he never had the issue ever again.
Wow.
There's just some like a weird, you know, like bloodline stuff too. And which I've heard Iboga accesses your bloodline. So a lot of times you're accessing contact with your ancestors. And this is an ancestor medicine, like how people from the Witi, like they know now it's accessing the bloodline in that sense. But
Mhm.
what he was mentioning was like, you know, Iboga will use your own psychic abilities to heal yourself in the medicines. What he mentioned. And when I read that, I was
Sounds
like,
right to me.
that's kind of crazy, you know?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Yeah, I was here. It was a very direct ancestor. My grandfather, he came to me in the journey that I quit drinking in, and he came to me. He was a World War II vet. He drank a case of beer a day to kind of treat his symptoms, and he died when I was in grade 4. And he came to be in that Iboga journey, and he said, "Trevor, you need to stop drinking for my lineage."
Mm,
So that was one of a handful of messages I got on that journey about the poison that alcohol was for me.
interesting. Yeah, I think it's really powerful when we connect to our bloodline, you know, and honoring that the bloodlines are real, you know, and you think you can you're talking about like epigenetics here, how things are being passed down to us. And it's our responsibility in this lifetime to clear your bloodline, you know, of all the karma, however you want to put it, and taking that respectful place within yourself, within your bloodline to remove that trauma so you don't pass it on to the next generation. And I
Yeah,
think that component's really amazing.
yeah. It's a yogic teaching would be that it's all memory. Like your body is the memory of your ancestors. you might not remember what your great 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 grandfather's nose looks like, but it's on your face, you
Yeah.
know. So, you know, and yeah, not only is your nose passed along, but imagine the severe traumas. Like the whole world went through multiple world wars, you know, within the last 80 years. Like that has an impact. I think we're still clearing a lot of that out. So that's, we say in our ceremonies that we do before we give the medicine, we want the atheist to feel comfortable as well. So we basically do a gratitude ceremony. But the one of the things we say in that ceremony is it has been said that these medicines have the potential to heal 7 generations into the past and also 7 generations into the future. So let's be grateful for our ancestors and for those who will call us ancestors prior to doing this medicine.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Totally makes sense. I believe about epigenetics for sure. I think I've definitely had to do my own healing, and some stuff has come up for me, and I had to realize like it was an honor to do that. And making sure like there also my intention was not to pass it on to my children, because now I'm a different person when I come home to my family, not dumping all my shit on them. But that takes a personal responsibility to not do that, to work on oneself. That's something that has to be kind of carved into your intention on a daily practice, on a daily day by day activity. So, I mean, do we all fall short? Absolutely. But if we have an idea of like what we're imprinting on our children and on our home life, that's a huge deal. I think if you just taking that idea into perspective helps a lot of people kind of change their viewpoint on how we see our home life, and how we see our worldview. Our worldviews kind of like an important aspect too. I think like for a lot of firefighters, we work in like the underworld. And so our worldview is really distorted. We see the
Mm,
worst of the worst, and so how can we view humanity in a way that is good? If you want to look at it in that way, it's usually not. You're like usually sick of people because you're tired of being in the underworld. You got to come home. You know what I mean?
yeah, it's wild. Yeah, the in the movie In Waves and War, without spoiling too much, there's just a scene where one of the SEALs is having a he's remembering a time when his father basically freaked out on him. The medicine is showing him that, and then it juxtaposed him doing the exact same thing to his daughter. And yeah, just with that kind of insight, you can break that cycle.
And from what I understand too, there's a spirit to the medicine. And I'd love for you to kind of talk about what that is.
Yeah, geez, there's an easy topic. It's, what is spirit? Spirit is basically the energy behind something, I believe. Like I could clap like this, that has a certain spirit to it, or I could clap like this, and that has a certain spirit to it. So I think everything has kind of an energetic imprint like that. So, kind of at a mundane level, Iboga also has a certain energy that comes with it. And that energy shows up sometimes for people in the form of a human being or an anthropomorphized version of a man. Some people see a man, some people see a woman, some people feel as though it's kind of almost like a mother nature type being that comes and greets them. But and some people feel as though they're really directly meeting somebody named Iboga, and that being has lessons to impart or healing to do. So yeah, and then some people don't see anything like that. I've never encountered anything like that, but I've never encountered an anthropomorphized being in front of me talking to me on behalf of the medicine. At the same time, when I take the medicine, I definitely feel like it has a certain energy. It has a certain spirit to it. It has a vibrational signature that is incredibly familiar to me. As soon as it kicks in, it's like, hey, buddy, I can see you there again. But yeah, it's almost, you don't want to get into the weeds too much about it. I think like it's just gonna, a rose has a spirit to it as well. When you smell that rose, that's the certain energetic signature of that rose. You can drink a rose tea and taste it. It has a certain energetic signature. And I think this very sophisticated plant, this very sophisticated molecule also has a super sophisticated energetic signature that can show up and do remarkable work to heal you.
Cool, man. Very well put.
Yeah.
I mean, just from like the studies I've heard people referring to that spirit as certain things. Like, I believe it was in Daniel Brett's book, the Iboga, the root of all healing. He refers to as Dr. Iboga,
I've heard
and
that. Yeah.
some people are referred to that spirit as being two spirited, or it's the only medicine that has two spirits, a male and a female energy. And then there's people refer to it as the godfather, or the grandfather. So it seems to be like people have placed some type of vocabulary to what they can like somewhat describe what they're experiencing.
Yeah, that reminds me of I was on a panel at a psychedelic conference in Toronto years and years ago, and there was this shaman woman from Nicaragua. She seemed super legit, and she was talking about the different medicines. And yeah, it's just it's it's us putting our ideas on top of these energies. But she talked about the mushrooms being los niños, the little children. And she talked about ayahuasca being the grandmother. And that's a super common way to refer to ayahuasca. People always talk about the grandmother. And then she talked about cactus like peyote or San Pedro as being the grandfather. And I kind of looked down the aisle at her and I said, well, what about Iboga? And she goes, oh, it's the master. Like, all right, we can be friends. But yeah, it's kind of, I always tell people, like, we get people prepared. And one of the ways that we prepare people is I say that taking Ibogaine is like getting on a roller coaster. There might be ups, there might be downs, maybe a loop, maybe a water feature or two with some purging into a bucket, maybe a tunnel of terror, but maybe a tunnel of love. None of that matters. The only real rule of roller coasters is just don't try and get off in the middle of the ride. And that's the best advice I can give you for Ibogaine, is just don't try and make it stop before it's ready to stop. I once had a former Navy SEAL on the mattress. As the medicine was coming on, it looked like he was actually trying to wrestle something, like trying to put it in a headlock. And I went over and I whispered to him, hey, dude, let it win. And that's really what you need to do. Once you take it, it is stronger than you. The good news there is it's also the most benevolent substance me and now thousands of people I know have ever encountered. So it's okay to let it win. And it seems to have some kind of an intelligence to it. And I don't know how that works, but you wouldn't spend a bunch of time and energy preparing to go for a surgery, then get on the surgeon's table and tell them how to do their job. And it's really similar with Ibogaine. I don't know where this intelligence comes from. Maybe it's a spirit. Maybe it's your own higher self that you're getting greater access to because of this. Maybe your higher self is a direct link to God. I don't know. But what I do know is this tends to make everybody better on multiple different levels. So let it do its thing. And I wouldn't get too caught up in the minutia. Like, what is this? For me, Iboga is definitely not God. Iboga is definitely not something I worship in any way, shape, or form. But is Iboga aligned with God? Maybe one of its soldiers? I would say I would place a pretty hardy bet on that.
That was very well put. I'm glad you depicted that the way you did, because I think we put a lot of meaning behind things sometimes, and it doesn't really serve the purpose of the intelligence of what we're talking about.
Mm.
So I just was curious about your thoughts, but that was such a very well spoken way to put that, dude. Because I think we can bastardize things the way we describe them, and I'm really on board with exactly what you just said, and I hope people don't bastardize this medicine because it is sacred, and I want people to make sure that stepping into something like this keeps its sanctity. And in reference to like how, we capitalize on everything in the Western world, I hope people understand that this is not something to capitalize on, and I want to reiterate that without a doubt. And I think when we get greedy with things, it can definitely change the intention behind stuff, because this is all about healing. This is all about helping people come back to themselves, and facilitating that is takes great respect and responsibility and power, the way you guys have done it in Ambio. And I want to definitely thank you guys and honor you guys for offering that for these people, because it's not easy to put your neck out like that, just starting a clinic and being like, hey, let's just give everyone Ibogaine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that takes a lot of courage, dude. It really does. And I just really want to make sure you're aware like that. A lot of people see you guys and what you're doing as like really great work, and the opportunities of the lives that have been turned around is tenfold. So, the courage is great, brother.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it hasn't been an easy journey, that's for sure. But I'm amazed at the outcome thus far. It's been a long time since that. My mom's a nurse practitioner, so trained Western cardiac nurse, and I'll never forget that day I called her and said, "Yeah, you know that Ibogaine stuff I've been posting about on Facebook? Yeah, well, I moved out of Vancouver 2 months ago, rented a house, and I'm providing it to people now." You're what? So it, but now she's my biggest fan. So it's been a good journey. It hasn't been easy, but it's been well worth it.
Sweet, man. Well, I'd love to close here, and thank you for your time, brother. And I really appreciate, like I said, what you guys are doing. I was curious. I did want to ask this last part. What is the cost usually for someone to come do Ibogaine? Because a lot of people ask me that, and like I always tell them, like, I don't know, dude. Like maybe I'll
Yeah.
ask Trevor when I do that episode with him.
For sure. Yeah, it's anywhere from about 7,000 to 21,000, depending on the length of the program. Detox programs last longer. Our foundational 5-day program, that is kind of our bread and butter, it's about 7 or 8,000. It's less for veterans at about that $7,000 rate, veterans and first responders, and then about 8,000 for civilians. And yeah, you know, it's a lot of money for a person for sure. At the same time, it's really um, bringing people down into kind of a five star type situation. We're known for our food. Our food is incredible. We're fully medicalized. There's lots of support staff. There's drivers. There's cars. There's rents on these houses. There's a lot of expenses. So we're not, we're just doing what we can to keep the doors open and maintain a super high quality product as well. And again, if we were to convert this into US dollars, providing this in the States, it's still a bargain to come to Mexico for sure.
Cool, man. Thank you for answering that. I really appreciate you. And yeah, I just definitely everyone watch that documentary that's coming out. And if you're interested in Ambio, it's ambio.life. Is that correct?
Yeah, ambio.life. We're on Instagram at Ambio Life Sciences. I'm on Instagram at psychedelic_provider. And yeah, In Waves and War, Netflix, November 3rd. It's an awesome movie.
All right, brother. Well, Trevor, thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate you. And everyone who's listening, definitely thank you. Check out Ambio and everything they offer, and take care. I love you.
Thanks for having me.